I had a very interesting conversation with a friend, Manoj, who's been a guest on this podcast quite often. And the other day, he used a term while talking in the flow of things. He used a word, outsidely, we may think this. And the phrase was so nice that I kind of quickly made up a phrase in my mind, outsidely, insidely. And that this led me to thinking, okay, what does it really mean? And so there are many people outside who think I am a calm person. I have these uh, detailed podcasts on the state of the mind and things like that, discussing things that are useful, perhaps. If you were to ask my mom, she would say he is angry very often. If you were to ask my kid, she would say dad is very conservative in things. So inside, I have a completely different world. I am all of these things and then some more, and then some I am not, and some if somebody says that you are this, and I'm forced to think, okay, maybe there is a point of view there. So this interesting contrast between what is insidely and outsidely has been on my mind today, and I'm glad to have one of my very good friends, John Britton, on the show today. Welcome, John.
Thank you for inviting me back. It's lovely to be here.
Yes. So, insidely, outsidely, what would you want to say to something like that?
It goes right. You've started off with your first comment going right to the heart of one of the most important things in my entire view of the world, which is that when you talk about it insidely and outsidely, you are essentially talking a binary, either inside or outside. And I don't think that binaries are sustainable in thinking. I don't, I understand that we experience inside and we sort of construct a reality that is outside, that they are in some ways different domains, but the experience of being me is the experience of connection between things. I do not live inside my mind. That part of my brain that says I only exists when it is in connection with something else. It might be in connection with a memory, in which case it is fundamentally a subjective experience. It might be, as it is now, in connection with you via the technology between Ireland and India. But I am looking at you, I am watching your responses, I am reflecting on the question that you asked. I am a relationship between a part of my mind that is, basically the ego or whatever. I am the relationship between that part of my mind and the world. It's raining heavily here, not unusual in Ireland. I am affected by the sound of rain on my roof. I am affected by the fact I can hear my cat outside. I am all of these things. So when we talk about outsidely or insidely, I think we're focusing on things that are useful because it's always useful to separate things apart, but they're not true. For me, truth is what is the nature of the connectedness between one thing and another.
Okay. Uh, what about perspective then? So, individual perspective is so unique. Uh, in fact, it's very interesting that you use the terms that you did because I have been pondering on something that. So, if you and I agree that this is called a podcast, this is a mic, this is
Mhm.
a form called Bunty, this is a form called John, uh, for terms that are necessary to have a connection through words, these are very necessary
Mhm.
because we both then know what is being referred to. But
Mhm.
internally, what I live in terms of that experience, even if we are living it together in the same geography, uh, or even if we were born twins to the same mother and we were experiencing certain things. I've been watching some series and there was some kind of Siamese twins where they had to be operated upon something,
Yes, yeah.
and they seem to have a, at least the fictional aspect had that they seem to have different minds uh, once the stakes became higher. So if they were
Mhm.
going to be operated and this person was going to live or the other person was going to die, and I was thinking that individually, genuinely, there is a different world running in my head,
Mhm.
which I imagine, I perceive, I respond to, and yet it is non-communicable in a way unless I let go of these barriers that you mentioned, which
Mhm.
are also the connecting. So they are both contradictory. While they help us connect, but if we take them a little too seriously, they also become the reason for our disconnect.
Yeah.
How do you explain this perspective in the worldview that you just mentioned?
It's a fascinating question, and it goes to the heart of so many things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That first of all, my inner world is not communicable to you,
Mm.
but nor is it ultimately communicable to me.
True.
So I see aspects of you and I understand aspects of you, I think, and of the rain and of my cat and so on, but not the totality. And I see aspects of me, but not the totality. So the the starting point for me of working with being alive is the radical embrace of not knowing, of going, if I can know nothing for sure, and many things not at all, what is the best guess I can make about my next action? The best guess. So, a radical giving up of, the illusion or the comfort of certainty. Then how does, you talk of really fascinating kind of extreme examples of Siamese twins or cojoined twins or whatever. Um, because those extreme examples are really interesting to really bring to the nub of a question. How do we develop that sense of the unique perspective? Again, I my my working hypothesis, and it's no more than that, is, of course, uh, is that that's explainable most clearly through things like systems theory, where any system will produce outcomes that cannot be mapped directly onto inputs. That systems have a life of their own, which create feedback mechanisms which amplify some things or crush other things, and it's true. It's true in all areas that I look at. If we say what is the system, how is the system working? It's perhaps more productive than going, how do I change this output? So if I am unhappy all of the time, rather than going, what am I unhappy about? How do I change that thing that I'm unhappy about? Say, what is it in the way that I connect with things that is generating this unhappiness? If I change how I connect, I am going to alter the system that I work in, and therefore I'm more likely to change the outcomes. If my health is not good, I change the system In other words, I try to get more regular sleep. I try to stop eating polyunsaturated fats and junk food, or whatever. If my creativity is blocked, I try to change my system of inattention, and I bring myself to places of discipline and focus. So changing the way that I do things rather than changing what I do or who I do things with, and so on. Those are systemic changes, and they seem to me to be what creates the subjective experience of being alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it also leads me to an interesting question that I had in the middle of your answer. I misread your answer as referring to ourselves as the system itself. Because yesterday I was talking to somebody and I mentioned that we have these bones and we have this blood running in the body, and uh, so we take it for granted that my stomach and my liver and my eyesight and my tongue will keep on doing what it is doing all the time. And because it's not malfunctioning right now, this assumption that it will continue to do so is a
Mm.
it's a false but very strong assumption, and it is
Yeah.
always on. Even as I speak to you, I know that every time I open my mouth and try to mouth these words, there is something sensible that is going to come out of it because my brain functions in a certain manner. And yet, this is the past tense. Like whatever is happening is immediately it is past. I have fallen back upon the memory of my talking, of the understanding of words, of
Mhm.
always having communicated. Now, the system that you mentioned, when you by the time you finished your answer, the loosely put the environment, if I keep changing it or trying to be in a new space, new time, new way of thinking, all those things, it might. So my question is, it might have an impact on this system as well,
Mhm.
and then this system will break out of its own obstacles, obstructions, hassles, worries, fears, doubts, because the change in the system has kind of uh, provoked a change in this living system as well.
Absolutely.
So, is there a methodical way of doing this, or is it always going to be, because you said unknown is a great part of the being
Mhm.
unsure, being walking into the unknown, something that as artists we are living it every day.
Mhm.
I may be talking to you, but I did not know 5 minutes prior to the podcast that, okay, insidely, outsidely is a good term. So I was asking my kid, okay, what could be a possible way of taking this forward? Would
Mhm.
this be a good title for the podcast? She said, you don't have to make it a podcast title, but it is a good topic to work with.
Yeah.
While talking, I got this idea of, okay, I can think like this, and then maybe see how John responds to this. Now, that's the only sure part of my podcast most times, that I know my first question a little well and I connect to it at a deeper this. I do not pretend to know it. I really seek for a connection, even if it is a very fragile connection. I will
Mhm.
name the connection and I will let it loose, allowing life and the guest and the podcast to take care of itself. Now, is it possible to have any discipline about this fragility?
Yeah. Uh, you, in many ways, you describe the discipline in as you set up that question or that response. You are, for me, you are describing what the discipline is. But before I go to that, I want to just pick up on one thing. You say that when you open your mouth, you assume something will come out, which is sensible. That your liver is going to keep working and all of that. Assumptions are absolutely essential to being able to function. People go, well, don't make assumptions. Yes, do make assumptions. Otherwise, every time you come to a chair, you're going to spend 10 minutes making sure it's not going to collapse before you sit on it. You just want to sit down. You're going to have to sniff every piece of food to make sure it's not poisonous. No, you just eat the food. We live by assumptions. If we didn't live by assumptions, the overwhelming chaos of moment by moment reality would simply paralyze us. So our assumptions are absolutely essential to functioning, but we should always remember that they are assumptions. We live by them, we use them, we're grateful for them, but we always remember that they are assumptions. And there's always a part of us that goes, this is what I think will happen, but if it doesn't, then we have to draw on what is perhaps one of the most important and least nurtured of human attributes, which is flexibility and adaptability. We live in an education system which says, learn these things, write these down, get it right, get a mark. Super cool. Great. I'm really glad that people know the answer to a question. But what happens if they're in a different context or the world changes or new technology is invented? It is much more important that we learn how to respond to the unexpected, how to be flexible, how to adapt our living current assumptions to new contexts. That is infinitely more important than learning facts and certainties. Infinitely more important. So assumptions are essential. They are, the lifeblood of being able to get from second to second. And simultaneously, we hold in mind the awareness that they are only assumptions. And if they prove to be flawed, we go, okay, become present, open my awareness, and trust myself to be able to be flexible and to adapt to the unexpected. If this chair collapses underneath me, I must trust that my arm will go down and protect myself so that I don't bang my head on the floor, as opposed to going, well, the chair collapsed, it's not my fault, I'm just going to fall to the floor. No, we need to be flexible and adaptable. So how do you systematize this, or what is the discipline of this? Well, I know we've spoken before about I created an approach to training individuals within ensemble. It was always my interest how to help people become truly present and also truly collaborative. So you could, you know, train performers, dancers, actors, improvisers, circus performers, musicians, the whole lot. And also I've worked in corporations and community activism and education all across the board. How to train people to be individually brilliant and also deep level collaborative. So it's not, the individual or the collective. It's how the brilliance of the individual serves the collective, and the power of the collective encourages and supports the individual. That for me is the heart of the training. And I call the training self with others. Now, there's no point in having a training unless I can systematize it well enough to be able to share it. And so for me, the starting point for self with others is in any situation, if you need to sort of try to understand that situation more, whether it's a relationship or a personal blockage or whatever, if you feel the need to dig deeper into that situation, there are 3 different ways to look at it, and all of them are useful. The first way is, what is the inner work that this situation demands of me? What stories am I bringing to it? What fears? What assumptions am I making? What history am I carrying with me? What is the inner work that is necessary for me to move forward in this situation or relationship? That's the first thing. The second thing to observe is, what is connecting with what to create this situation? You're talking to me and it's making me feel uncomfortable. Why? What am I connecting your perfectly innocent conversation with? What's being connected? Yeah, it's connecting with the memory of a conversation I had sometime before, or it's connecting with a sense of insecurity that I don't think I'm very clever, or, whatever. See if you can map what is connecting with what to create the situation. that you are attempting to understand better or to explore. That's the first. So the first is inner work. The second is what I call connections work, mapping out the web of connectedness. And thirdly is systems work. What is the context within which this is happening? Is the context creating particular outcomes? And it might be really big things like, I always have an argument with this person. We go to work and we're in the office, we have an argument. Maybe the office is the wrong place to be having that conversation because you are actually their managerial superior and therefore they feel resentful and whatever. So maybe if you went somewhere for a coffee and had a chat, it would defuse a perceived power relationship, and so the system would be different and perhaps the conversation would go better, or vice versa. I always have these chats with this person. They're we're good friends, but in the office they're no good to me. Maybe you need to change the context and go, this conversation is an office-based conversation or whatever. What is the context within which it's happening? Are you struggling with something? Is it because you're always trying to do it towards the end of the day when you're tired? Or first thing in the day when you're going, I can't do my creative work at the beginning of the day because I feel I've got a to-do list of 100 things to do. What's the context within which you're trying to pursue this vision or this aim or this task? I want to be an artist, but I'm terribly, terribly worried about money. So I'm trying to deliver a result as an artist immediately so that I'll get rich. And of course, you create bad art. So maybe the context is so toxic that you need to solve the money question before you commit yourself to your art. Maybe there's no straightforward answers here. But these three things are: what is the inner work that's demanded of me from this situation? What is connecting with what to create this situation, internally and externally, inwardly and outwardly? And what is the context within which it's happening? And you may well find that, the context is fine, the connectedness is fine, but your inner work, that's where the problem or the challenge lies. It may be that you go, actually, I'm doing fine with this and everything's connecting fine, but the context is just shot to hell. So, or it may be a combination of all three. Now, within those three areas of looking, inner work, connection work, and systems work, I think there are then 7 really useful questions to ask. Do you want me to go through those 7 questions? Is
Uh,
that
we
useful?
we could, but I have a
Yeah,
question that is
I don't want to overload you with the whole history of stuff. So, but there
no,
are
no, it
then
is
questions
beautiful.
to ask. So,
It is
so
beautiful. Maybe sometime we'll go through that if we have a
yeah,
bit of time. Since I know
absolutely.
that you have a paucity of time, I want to jump to another question which seems very valid as of right now to me. You've been talking a lot about there are these assumptions that we are making, and we need to be clear that these are assumptions, and without them, we would not have a handle on that moment as of such, or we would be too reactionary or too fearful, too doubtful in some manner. My
Mhm.
question to you then, what is reality?
Odd. Just one of those little questions that you mull on from time to time. I like the way that, this is a podcast where you're not afraid to say things like, what is reality?
That's the reason why I stopped you, because I thought those 7 things might be important, and then I'll lose the thread of this part of the questioning.
Across all of human history, of course, people have asked those questions, haven't they? What is reality? I wrote an essay a little while ago for an American online publication called Eon, where I traced the origins of kind of human societies in the Syria and Turkey and so on, and also in the Republic of Ireland where I live, through the architecture of places like Newgrange in Ireland and some of the ancient places in the Middle East and so on. There is a book by 2 archaeologists that suggest that architecture directly reflects images that emerge from human dreaming. That the stories that were being told about those people, those early people, as they came together into collectives and began to settle in places rather than being purely nomadic. The stories that they were telling to make sense of being these fearful small band of people surrounded by dark forests were actually stories on which they drew on the imagination as manifested in dreams. So common things that are reported from dreams, even today, right across all cultures, going through passageways, spirals, levels, anthropomorphic shapes, all of these things. These are common in dreams, and you can see them carved into ancient, prehistoric architectures. And I was using that as a way of saying that the skill of the performer, in other words, the person who can articulate a story, is the fundamental human skill. It is the fundamental skill of human interaction. And we are social animals, so it is our fundamental skill. What that really leads me to think, what is reality? Reality is a story. It's a story that we each are telling, and we are spending our lives telling other people our story about reality. And we come to agreements about which parts of the story we accept and which we don't. I accept some of your story, I don't accept some of your story. You accept some of mine, vice versa. There's some people in the world I accept very little of their story. Some people in the world I don't understand their story because they see the world through such different eyes. A cat then has a different story. And that's a story not told in words, but told in actions. So too a slug or a snail. All stories, by which I mean ways that they choose to make some form of sense out of the world. So when I think it's in Buddhism, isn't it, that the talk is of consensual reality. Those are the parts of the stories that we can agree on. And then when you look at consciousness studies, contemporary consciousness studies, they're basically saying the same thing. I mean, not for the first time, ancient spiritual wisdom, particularly coming out of the East and out of indigenous traditions, was 5,000 years ahead of contemporary Western science. Because contemporary consciousness studies are saying basically we receive stimulus from the outside world and we construct a reality from it. We construct reality. Another way of saying construct reality to me is we put it into sequences that make sense, and that's what a story is. So reality, it's a story. And people go, oh, well, there's only a story, that's not important. No, stories are the most important things in the world. Without stories, we cannot function. I tell myself a story that this chair that I'm sitting on is not going to collapse. That enables me to focus on talking to you, not on going, oh my God, the chair's going to collapse. We live by stories. And one of the joys of being human is the sharing of stories with others. Not just the echo chamber of, I'm just going to have people tell me the same things that I believe, but the joy of talking. I mean, I love, this is the third or fourth podcast we've done. I love your mind because clearly there are ways in which you and I think in the same way. And clearly there are differences.
Yeah.
And that for me is absolutely fascinating because your story aligns with and challenges mine.
Okay. So I have a trick question here. So since you gave the same example of the chair holding while you're sitting on it, in the assumption part also and the reality part as well, also, although you kind of contextualized in a manner which makes sense in that sentence, in the way you are projecting it at that point of time. My question is that then can we safely presume that all of this duality of assumption versus reality is an exploratory thing? Because these words get definitive something that we were speaking prior to the podcast, but in a different context. But words get definitive, and then we think that this is all that the word can contain.
Mm.
But there might be a layer of thought or a layer of thinking that we can explore, which is exploratory itself. Like you are just living it. I remember some example you had given while you were teaching the actors. There was something that you would bring in an element of surprise into the scene, if I remember correctly, and not tell them or give them only half the information and allow them to have confidence that they would complete the scene in a manner that it would complete itself,
Mhm.
rather than know it beforehand, that this is how it's going to work out. With obviously, now I'm presuming I had never thought about this element then, that there will be some. So if you're going to bring an obstacle while I'm walking, I know that I may fall or I may spot it. There are only two ways about it. But well, there could be something else altogether. I may just stop and look at and marvel at the obstacle itself. But that is something that neither you had bargained for or nor I had any clue about it.
Mm.
And that kind of allows us to live in the moment, like you said,
Yeah.
possibly understanding the inner workings, my connection with the what is happening,
Mm.
and at the same time also figuring out how am I going to contextualize that thing, or how is the context going to contextualize
Mm.
me,
Yeah.
who is also flowing in the work. So, is there an openness to living that is important at the base of it all, which is
Yeah.
which is actually connecting us to the Neanderthals or later while we were still in the jungles? So, some part of us was fearful that we would not want to be eaten up by a wild animal. Some part of us was had to figure out whether we would get a fruit from a tree or we would manage to get something, the roots, the shoots, something that could
Mm.
be eaten, or hunt for or create some weapon or something. So it was never sure that what was happening could be taken for granted because you were still exploring. And that itself continues to save us today because we don't make quote unquote assumptions about the word assumption or reality.
Continues to save us and also continues to entrap us
Okay?
because you're 30, 40,000 years ago, you're walking through the jungle and there's a blackberry on a bush and a red berry on a bush, and you've eaten the blackberry before and it doesn't taste very nice, but you know it won't kill you and it's quite healthy, but you've never seen the red berry before. Everything about you goes, eat the blackberry because the red berry could kill you, and you may just have failed to discover strawberries, you know.
Wow.
So uh,
Wow.
the willingness to take risks and move beyond the familiar is, of course, how we grow. But at the same time, the reluctance to do so is how we stay safe. And so we live in a productive tension between living in our assumptions and challenging our assumptions. Your talk about uh, the flexibility of mind, I think, goes to the heart of something really important. It's interesting. I'm just trying to pitch an essay, but I can't find anyone who wants me to write it. So, uh, but on what I call about the difference between two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and four-dimensional thinking. Uh, Again, it grows out of something that I think is at the heart of creativity. Two-dimensional thinking is either or. Is this the right way to play Hamlet or the wrong way to play Hamlet? It's a nonsensical question. It's you see an obstruction on the path. Am I going to fall over it or am I going to just get over it? That's a pretty low grade form of thinking, as opposed to thinking 3D thinking. That's 2D thinking. Binary thinking is two-dimensional thinking. 3D thinking is going, there's a spectrum between one thing and another. So there is no right, no wrong, but there are an awful lot of places between right and wrong. Some things are more right than others. Some things are more appropriate than others. Can I get over this obstacle on the path? Well, you can give it a go and you might be a bit clumsy and stumble a bit, but you'll probably get over. So you're somewhere on the spectrum between falling and not falling. Generally, most things are three-dimensional and live on a spectrum. But four-dimensional thinking, just as in four-dimensional space-time, brings in the element of time. So there is a spectrum between right and wrong, or good and bad, or whatever. But also where and when you are making the decision is part of that spectrum. What might be right or more appropriate in one moment might be less appropriate in another moment. Time alters the appropriateness of decisions. So, what's the right or wrong way of playing Hamlet? Fairly meaningless question. What are more or less useful or appropriate ways of playing Hamlet? That's a useful set of questions to ask in a rehearsal room. What happens when you put Hamlet on stage in front of 5,000 people, and then the next day you put it on stage in front of 20 people in a really small room? Time changes the choices. So the fourth dimension of thinking is the context, the time in which something is happening. And there's an irony here, we need to move generally, if we're trying to make decisions in life, we need to move back to binary thinking, because in the end, you either do something or you don't. You do one thing and it means you're not going to do everything else. So the ultimate moment of action is almost always binary. It's almost always a yes or a no. You can't say, I am both going to be loud and quiet at the same time. It doesn't happen.
Okay.
But to reach that clarity of choice, we need to move, I think, from the simple security of yes, no, right, wrong, through to what is the spectrum between what feel to me like two extremes, through to what is the spectrum and when and how and where is this going to happen, which is really the context of time. And that's about the complexification of the thinking process, which leads to the simple clarity of choice. And I always love the quote from an architect, Tessenov, an early 20th century German architect. He didn't actually say this, but because his quote was a bit more long-winded, but basically he said, the simple answer is not always the best, but the best answer is always simple. And I love that sense of going, we have to go through the complexity of challenging assumptions, looking at connectedness and so on, so that we can make the choice in the end that goes, this feels like the choice I need to make. And it's simple. I've been through all the complexity. I know that this is not right or wrong. This is the choice I am making. And if anyone challenges me on it, I'll hear their challenge and I'll maybe change my choices, but I will be able to justify why I made this choice. Even if they don't get it. They should never have done this, whatever. No, I made the choice because I had thought it through. I had looked inside. I'd explored systems, all of this stuff. And this feels like the thing that I need to do. For my own sake, or for the sake of my community, or for the sake of the world, or, to honor my creativity, or whatever it is that is your fundamental objective.
Beautiful words, heavy words, complex and simple words in that one very detailed answer that you gave. I want to end with a small snippet of a story that I remember. There was some fiction novel on the World War II, I think, and the hero seems to be a guy who gets into situations which are definitely going to end in disaster, and he always comes out alive. So he's asked by one of the characters that, how do you do this? Like he's planning, and just before the planning, he says, I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and all of the I am going to do this, I am going to do this is very open-ended. There is no guarantee that it would work, but he has this calculated plan of this is how it might. He's getting into enemy territory and trying to free somebody and come, perhaps something like that is the scene. And he's asked this question, how do you succeed when the chance The 100% chance is that you will fail. He says, because I don't care. And I was very mesmerized by this answer, and I stayed with it
Mm,
for a long time because obviously he's the protagonist, so he's going to come out alive or come out looking like a hero. All those things are a
mm,
given, and yet there is this madness to the whole thing. This also kind of connects me to what you've been saying. One last other thing that I want to ask you to either affirm that I've understood it correctly. So, in this answer, you brought out the aspect of time, bringing the fourth dimension to the entire spectrum of
mhm.
what is. And in your earlier answer, you mentioned context as being very important to the other two aspects of inner life and
Mhm.
the connection.
Yeah,
Are they the same? So, are we saying that if we accept the fact that while we are driving the narrative for our assumption or reality in that moment, there is also the looseness of not taking this whole thing seriously and letting go of things even as we understand them, let it go, understand them, let
mhm.
it go, because on a scale you can't really define where the black and white will, the decision
Yeah,
itself will make that decision for you,
yeah.
but you have to be from innocence to knowing it all to coming back to innocence as a choice
Mhm.
becomes the only journey for all of us. Would you agree on that line of thought?
Absolutely. And the importance of time in this is that is often, I might feel stuck in my life or trying to make a decision, and I'll, go through the process of reflecting and thinking, and I'll make the best decision I can. And then 6 months later, the decision I made doesn't feel like it's working out or doesn't feel like it's aligned. And the danger is to go, oh, I made the wrong decision. But no, actually, I may well have made the right decision for that time, but because time has changed, it is no longer the right decision. And so we go back towards not knowing. Go, okay, I really worked towards knowing to the best of my ability, taking the best guess I could. I didn't get it wrong, but time has revealed more things to me, or I have changed, or the world has changed. So go back into the not knowing and then explore, make choices, and then live assuming that you've made the right choice, but always going, does this still feel right? I get it all the time with artists who go, I wanted to be an actor and now 10 years in, I'm not feeling the buzz anymore. Have I done something wrong? And I go, no, either you need to change how you're an actor or stop being an actor, but you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that you changed and time changed, and maybe you want to earn money to have a family, or maybe you're, only getting TV commercials when you want to be working in movies. Whatever. You didn't do anything wrong, but time brought you more information. And you need to now reflect to absorb that information so that you can see whether your assumptions are still valid and appropriate and whether they're still serving you. We change. Time changes us. I'm 60 now. I'm different to how I was when I was 50, 40, 30, 20. Doesn't mean I failed in my decisions back then. It means I've changed.
Um, I don't want to let you go, but I realize that we've just crossed the time limit that you had set. Uh, a wonderful, wonderful conversation. This, like always, you provoke me to look at things that I otherwise miss in the big picture. You coming close gives you a different perspective to them,
Uh,
and then splicing them up uh, enlivens the entire interaction with life. Although it is
it's,
only in a conversation. Thank you so much for that.
it's always a real joy to talk with you. I love the way you take things to pieces and look at them differently. It's a real joy to chat with you always. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.